Welcome to your deep dive. This time, we're diving into the world of Narcotics Anonymous.
Through the personal stories of its members.
Yeah, using excerpts you shared from the 6th edition of their basic text.
That's right. It's a collection of stories, reflections, and the core principles of the NA program.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Yeah,
It's amazing to see the sheer diversity of voices in these stories, right?
absolutely.
People from all walks of life,
All backgrounds,
all ages.
each with their own unique journey to and through addiction.
But despite those differences, there's this common thread of desperation that brings them to NA, right?
Definitely.
That feeling of hitting rock bottom.
Of having tried everything else and failed.
And it's heartbreaking, but also inspiring
I agree.
to see how NA provides a sense of community and belonging.
A place where people understand what they're going through.
Yeah, like in that story about the surfer who joined the Navy just to escape his addiction.
His story really resonated with me.
Me too. I mean,
He thought changing his environment would solve everything. But the underlying issues remain.
it makes you think, right? How often do we search for external fixes when the real problem is internal?
All the time.
And his story shows how insidious addiction can be, slowly chipping away at your life, even as you maintain a facade of success.
Exactly. It's a common misconception that addiction only affects a certain type of person.
That's so true.
But these stories challenge those stereotypes. Addiction doesn't discriminate. It affects people of all socioeconomic backgrounds.
Professions
Right.
and ages.
Like the story of the woman who, despite a successful career, found herself spiraling into a life of isolation and despair.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah,
These stories really shatter the myths and misconceptions surrounding addiction.
showing its devastating impact in all its raw honesty.
That's right.
And they don't shy away from showing how addiction affects not just the individual, but their families and relationships.
Of course.
Like the man who finally faced the devastating consequences of his addiction when his son overdosed.
His story is particularly poignant.
It really is. Because it was that realization that his addiction was not just hurting him, but also those he loved most,
Right.
that finally propelled him towards recovery.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does it take for someone to finally reach that point of surrender?
That's a question that NA explores in depth through its 12 steps.
The 12 steps, the foundation of the NA program, right? Now, we won't go through each step in detail,
Sure.
but let's look at how they address not just the physical act of abstaining from drugs, but the underlying emotional and spiritual issues that fuel addiction.
Okay.
So the cornerstone of the program is step 1, admitting powerlessness over addiction.
Right.
I can see why that would be so difficult, to admit you've lost control.
Absolutely. But admitting powerlessness isn't about weakness.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that willpower alone can't conquer this.
Right.
It's about accepting help and trusting the process.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that acceptance opens the door to step 2, coming to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity.
Now, this is where some people might struggle, right?
I can see that.
This idea of a higher power might sound strange, but in NA, it's really about finding something bigger than yourself to believe in,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like for you.
Exactly.
It could be the NA fellowship itself, the power of shared experience,
Right.
or a more traditional understanding of God. The key is that it's something outside of yourself.
It's something you can draw strength and guidance from.
So you're essentially surrendering to this higher power in step 3, letting go of that need to control everything.
Exactly. And you see this theme of surrender echoed in John's story about joining the Navy.
Oh, yeah?
He thought he could outrun his addiction, but ultimately had to surrender to the fact that he needed help.
Surrender is such a powerful concept. It's almost counterintuitive, right? When we're struggling, our instinct is often to fight harder, to try to control the situation.
To take charge.
Yeah. But sometimes the strongest thing we can do is let go.
That's a really important insight.
And from letting go, we move into self-reflection with step 4, right? Taking a deep, honest look at yourself, your flaws and your strengths. It's like shining a light into the darkest corners of your soul.
It's not about dwelling on the negative, though.
That-
It's about gaining self-awareness.
Right, understanding what makes you tick, what drives your addiction, what you need to heal.
Exactly.
And once you've done that internal work, you move on to step 5, admitting to God, to yourself, and to another human being the exact nature of your wrongs.
That's right.
This is where the real healing begins, isn't it? Breaking the cycle of secrecy and shame that surrounds addiction.
It is.
This step is about more than just confessing. It's about taking responsibility for your actions.
And beginning to make amends, which is what step 8 focuses on.
That's right. It's about acknowledging the pain you've caused
Yeah.
and taking concrete steps to repair the damage.
Exactly.
Like in that story about the woman who rebuilt her life after relapsing.
Her story is so inspiring.
It really is.
Because it shows that even when we stumble, even when we make mistakes, we can always choose to get back up and recommit to our recovery.
And speaking of support, you also shared a story about a man who found his sponsor through a seemingly random series of events at a convention.
It sounds like fate, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It reminds me of that saying, you can't go to an NA meeting and just get a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
There's this sense that everyone is connected, that everyone is there to support each other.
It really does feel like a lifeline for people who are struggling.
Yeah.
And it's incredible to see how these steps, while focused on individual recovery, also address the ripple effects of addiction on families and relationships.
That's right.
It's about finding your own strength and support while navigating the complexities of family dynamics and addiction.
And it shows how NA's principles of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness can be applied to all areas of life, not just the individual's recovery.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground here already.
We have.
From personal stories of desperation and rock bottom to the transformative power of the 12 steps. It's clear that NA offers a powerful path to recovery.
It does. What strikes me is how, despite the diversity of backgrounds and experiences, there's this underlying unity, this shared understanding of the disease of addiction and the path to recovery.
It's like a universal language.
Yeah.
Spoken in the shared stories of struggle and triumph, a language of hope
Of resilience.
and the unwavering belief that recovery is possible for anyone who seeks it. But I'm curious, from all these personal stories, what stood out to you as particularly impactful?
You know, for me, it's the way these stories reveal the power of vulnerability. These individuals are sharing their deepest struggles, their darkest moments.
Yeah.
And in doing so, they're not only helping themselves heal, but they're also offering a beacon of hope to others who might be struggling in silence.
That's such an important point, and it makes me think about the role of storytelling in breaking down stigma.
Of course.
When we hear these personal stories, it's harder to judge, to dismiss, to turn away.
You're right.
It reminds us that addiction can affect anyone, and that recovery is possible for everyone.
Exactly. And it makes me wonder, if sharing our stories can be so transformative on an individual level, what could happen if we embraced vulnerability as a society? Could that be a key to addressing addiction and other social issues on a larger scale?
That's a really interesting thought, and maybe that's something for our listeners to consider as we continue this deep dive.
Yeah.
If addiction thrives in isolation, could a culture of vulnerability and open communication be part of the solution?
That idea of a culture of vulnerability is really intriguing, isn't it? And it ties into what we were talking about earlier with surrender.
You mean how surrender can be a gateway to vulnerability?
Exactly. When we surrender to the fact that we can't control everything,
Right.
when we let go of our need to appear perfect, we open ourselves up to connecting with others in a more authentic way.
Yeah. It's like we're giving ourselves permission to be human, flaws and all.
And in those imperfections, in those shared struggles, we find connection.
Which brings us to the next phase of our deep dive, I guess.
Okay.
Exploring the concept of recovery itself.
Okay, right. We often think of recovery as a destination,
Yeah.
a point we reach where we're cured.
Like crossing a finish line.
Yeah, but these stories paint a different picture, don't they?
They do.
They show us that recovery is more of a journey,
Right.
an ongoing process of growth and transformation.
It's like climbing a mountain.
Yeah.
There are peaks and valleys, moments of triumph and moments of struggle.
And the path isn't always linear.
Nope, there might be setbacks,
Detours.
moments where you feel like you're sliding backward,
And that's where the idea of taking it one day at a time becomes so crucial.
focusing on the present moment, on taking each step as it comes.
Right, because when you're staring up at the whole mountain, the journey can feel overwhelming.
For sure.
You shared a story about a woman who, after years of struggling with addiction and mental illness, finally found peace and purpose through NA.
Her story is so inspiring because it shows that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, recovery can bring about profound healing and growth.
And remember the story of the man who relapsed multiple times before finally finding the strength to stay clean.
That one really stuck with me.
It did.
Yeah, it highlights the fact that setbacks are a part of the process.
Yeah.
What matters is that he kept coming back, he kept trying.
And he had that community there to support him, to pick him up when he fell.
Which brings us to another key element of recovery, the community aspect.
Right. You know, in the early days of recovery, Just getting through each day without using can feel like a monumental victory.
Absolutely.
And having that network of support, of people who understand what you're going through, can make all the difference.
It's like having a team of Sherpas guiding you up the mountain, offering encouragement, sharing their own experiences, and helping you avoid the pitfalls.
Now, we've talked about the importance of community, but recovery isn't just about abstaining from drugs and attending meetings, is it?
Absolutely not. It's about addressing the underlying issues that fuel the addiction in the first place,
Like what?
like the trauma,
The pain.
the emotional wounds.
The unhealthy coping mechanisms.
So it's really about healing, becoming whole again.
And that healing takes time
Patience.
and a willingness to do the work
Work that often involves facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
and learning to develop healthier coping mechanisms,
Right.
building a new life that's based on solid principles and fulfilling relationships.
It's about finding new passions, new hobbies, new ways to spend your time that don't involve drugs.
And rediscovering the joy in simple things,
Oh, yeah.
the beauty of nature,
The laughter of loved
the
ones.
satisfaction of a job well done.
Essentially, recovery is about reclaiming your life, taking back the reins and steering yourself towards a future filled with hope and possibility.
Exactly. And that's what makes these stories so powerful.
They are.
They show us that no matter how dark the path has been, no matter how deep the despair, recovery is always possible.
These stories remind us that addiction doesn't have to be a life sentence.
It doesn't.
It can be a catalyst for profound personal growth and transformation. Now, we've touched on the idea of service earlier,
We have.
but I think it deserves a deeper dive.
I agree. This is where the idea of giving back what you've received takes center stage in NA.
Yeah, it's about carrying the message to other addicts, sharing your experience, and offering support to those who are struggling.
And as we see in the stories, service can take many forms.
From sponsoring newcomers to setting up chairs for meetings to making coffee to organizing events.
There's a role for everyone.
And the beauty of service is that it's not just about helping others. It's also a powerful way to deepen your own recovery.
How so?
It takes you out of yourself, right? It shifts the focus away from your own problems and onto the needs of others.
And in doing so, it reinforces your commitment to recovery and strengthens your connection to the community.
It's like a virtuous cycle you give, and in giving, you receive even more.
It's like that story you shared about the man who found his sponsor through a random act of service at a convention. A seemingly small gesture led to a profound connection.
It's a powerful reminder that even the smallest actions can have a ripple effect,
They can.
that we're all interconnected in ways we might not even realize.
So if you're feeling lost or disconnected in your recovery, consider getting involved in service.
It's a great way to meet new people, to give back to the community, and to strengthen your own commitment to recovery.
And you never know how your actions might inspire or support someone else on their journey.
These stories are filled with examples of how service transforms not only the receiver, but also the giver. It's a beautiful testament to the power of human connection.
And speaking of connection, we've talked a lot about the NA community, but let's not forget the impact that recovery has on families.
You mean how individual recovery can ripple outward and heal family relationships?
Exactly. Addiction often creates a web of pain and dysfunction within families.
Secrets, lies, broken promises, resentment, fear.
It can be incredibly damaging.
Right.
But as individuals begin to recover, as they start to heal themselves, they also begin to heal those wounds within their families.
Like in the story of the woman whose sons were struggling with addiction. She found strength and support in NA, not only for herself, but also for her sons.
Her story highlights the importance of family recovery.
It does.
It's not just about the individual getting clean.
Right.
It's about the entire family system healing and moving forward together.
And it underscores the fact that NA's principles of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness can be applied to all relationships, not just those directly impacted by addiction.
It's about creating a culture of empathy and understanding within families.
Okay.
A space where everyone feels safe to share their struggles and support each other.
And that's a powerful message, isn't it? That recovery isn't just about the individual.
It's not.
It's about creating a ripple effect of healing that extends outward to families
Communities.
and ultimately the world.
Exactly. And it reminds us that even in the face of immense challenges,
Yeah.
even when it feels like everything is falling apart, there's always hope.
Hope that individuals can recover,
That families can heal.
and that together we can create a world where addiction no longer holds such a powerful grip. Now, as we move into the final part of our deep dive, let's shift our focus from the personal to the societal.
Okay.
What can we learn from these individual stories about how to address addiction on a larger scale?
That's a great question.
I think one of the key takeaways is the importance of shifting our perspective on addiction.
Okay.
Instead of seeing it as a moral failing or a personal weakness,
Right.
we need to start recognizing it for what it is,
Right.
a complex disease that requires a multifaceted approach to treatment and prevention.
That makes sense.
And if we understand addiction as a disease,
Yeah.
then we can start to treat it with the same compassion and understanding that we extend to other illnesses,
Exactly. And that means investing in research
expanding access to treatment.
and creating supportive environments where individuals feel safe to seek help without fear of stigma or judgment.
And it also means challenging the societal norms that often contribute to addiction in the first place.
Like what?
Like the pressure to achieve,
The glorification of busyness,
the disconnect from nature.
the lack of meaningful connection.
All of these factors can create fertile ground for addiction to take root.
So maybe on a societal level, recovery isn't just about treating individuals.
Right.
It's about creating a culture that supports well-being and connection.
That's a powerful thought. And it brings us back to that idea we were discussing earlier about vulnerability.
Right. If addiction thrives in isolation, could a culture of vulnerability be part of the solution?
It's an intriguing question to consider. Imagine a society where people feel comfortable talking about their struggles, where seeking help is seen as a sign of strength, where connection and empathy are valued above all else.
That sounds like a world worth striving for.
And maybe, just maybe, these personal stories can inspire us to start building that world, one conversation, one act of kindness, one step at a time. You know, it's striking how these personal stories, while deeply personal, offer such profound insights into the broader societal issue of addiction. It's like each story is a microcosm of the larger struggle.
I completely agree. We've been talking about the importance of connection and community and how NA fosters that sense of belonging. It makes you wonder, how can we as a society do a better job of supporting that kind of connection for everyone, not just those who found their way to NA?
That's such an important question because, as we've heard, so many people hit rock bottom before they find their way to a support system.
Yeah, it's like they're wandering in the darkness searching for a light switch.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, these stories can be a guide for us, a way to illuminate the path towards a more compassionate and effective approach to addiction.
What if we focused on early intervention? Creating environments where people feel safe to ask for help before they reach that point of crisis.
So not just treatment centers and interventions, but a more preventative approach
Yeah.
that emphasizes community support and connection.
Right. Places where vulnerability is met with compassion, not judgment.
Okay.
Where people can share their struggles without fear of stigma.
That reminds me of the principle of anonymity that's so central to NA.
It's a powerful concept, isn't it? That idea of creating a safe space where people can be honest about their challenges without fear of repercussions.
And maybe that's something we can apply on a societal level.
Right.
Creating more spaces where people feel safe to share their struggles.
Because when we hide our problems, when we're afraid to ask for help, that's when shame takes root and things spiral out of control.
These stories also challenge us to rethink our assumptions about who an addict is. We've heard from surfers, executives, mothers.
It's clear that addiction doesn't discriminate.
Exactly. It affects people from all walks of life.
All socioeconomic backgrounds.
All ages.
So maybe part of the solution is simply acknowledging that shared humanity.
Yeah.
Recognizing that addiction is a human problem, not a problem confined to a certain type of person.
Because when we see ourselves in others, it's harder to judge, to dismiss, to turn away.
It all comes back to that idea of connection, doesn't it?
It does.
If addiction is a disease of isolation, as we've heard in so many of these stories, then maybe recovery is about finding our way back to each other.
It's about building bridges of understanding,
Creating communities of support.
recognizing that we're all in this together.
And maybe, just maybe, that's the most important takeaway from this deep dive.
What's that?
That connection is the antidote, not just for individual recovery, but for healing as a society.
It's a beautiful thought and one that leaves me feeling hopeful.
Me too. These stories remind us that even in the darkest of times, even in the face of immense challenges, there's always a glimmer of light.
And sometimes all it takes is a single spark, a single story, a single act of kindness to ignite a flame of hope that can spread outward and illuminate the path towards a brighter future.
So, as you move forward from this deep dive, consider how these stories might inspire you to cultivate more connection in your own life, to reach out to those who might be struggling to advocate for more compassionate and effective approaches to addiction in your community.
Because as we've learned from these powerful personal journeys, recovery is possible, connection is key, and hope is always within reach.